Thank you. We are online. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much to joining the session Urban-Rural Partnerships, Driving Transition Towards Sustainability through Science Policy Cooperation. We have heard this morning from our keynote speaker, Maria Vasilaki, and Margit Noll explained and stressed it very importantly that the local level and local stakeholders are very important for transitions. And we recognize that in the Leipzig Charta, as mentioned this morning, the first time the functional urban area has been a very prominent role in the implementation of the future urban policy of the European Union, which is including the European Regional Development Fund, agricultural policy, and so on. So it's a broad spectrum of different policies and initiatives which are related to the idea of the Leipzig Charta in the idea of transition of urban-rural areas. We are happy to present today partners and peoples and initiatives from different worldwide and European perspectives, which have some strong links and strong ideas on the topic of driving urban partnerships. And I welcome firstly our colleague from UN Habitat, Remy CGP. Remy, hello. Good afternoon. Secondly, also Frederick Christoph Richters is not joining us now. He's joining a little bit later, but he's the colleague from the Urban Agenda Sustainable Land Use Initiative, and he will present the first draft conclusions of the Sustainable Land Use Working Group of the European Commission. We welcome Margit Noll. Hello, Margit. Some of you have seen in the morning the intervention presenting the initiative of JPI Urban Europe, and we have the opportunity now to get a little bit deeper into discussion on the topic and of the future calls and ideas on the implementation of the agenda. And Kai Böhme, also very important role, a little bit equivalent to the Leipzig Charta presentations this morning. Kai Böhme is one of the auditor and I think the busy people behind the Territorial Agenda of the European Union, which is a component which reflects more the level of spatial development at the European level. So we have partners and discussion partners for the plenum this afternoon, which are driving different levels on the implementation of urban-rural partnerships. And we will start in the first round, some short statements, ideas, and we will start with Remy. Remy, you published last year the UN Habitat Urban-Rural Linkages, the guiding principles and framework for actions. So maybe at a worldwide level, is UN Habitat still front running in urban-rural partnership, and European initiatives are lacking a little bit behind? The floor is yours. Unmute your microphone. We could not hear you yet. We're looking with our technician, Remy. Try to unmute your microphone. No noise. Perhaps if Remy is not able to communicate by microphone, we start. Perhaps we start with Margit. Who's in the microphone? Margit?
I think mine is working.
Yeah. So, Remy, sorry. Try to test your microphone. We are probably trying to start the presentation and the first statement of Margit from JPI Urban Europe, which have still presented the JPI initiatives this morning. And Margit, what is the idea behind our urban-rural partnership topic in JPI? Are there strong links one to the other, or it's more one of several topics in this initiative?
All right, thank you. Great to be here and join the discussion in this with these distinguished speakers. Yeah, I would like to pick up some messages from the morning maybe. So our partnership that we are preparing is a member states initiative, a cooperation between member states and the European Commission under the upcoming framework or the next research and innovation framework of Horizon Europe. So in that sense, it's built on the national and the regional context. It very much picks up and provides opportunity for regions to have a strong say and an involvement in this initiative. Although it's a transnational European cooperation, it's very much built on the regional national settings. But in principle, the partnership is about transformation of our urban areas, and so that we can achieve our sustainability goals, whatever they might be, in the Green Deal, in the SDGs, you name it. And basically, even if we call it an urban transformation, we won't achieve much when we're not considering the functional context and the regional context, the functional urban areas. So whatever we are addressing in the urban context, it must build upon the relevant territorial scale, right? And this is something that we hear very strongly from our stakeholders. We did a comprehensive consultation throughout the year, and one of the signals was quite clearly that we need to consider that territorial context, that we need to go from the neighborhoods to the city, from the city and the district to the peri-urban areas, that the regional context matters. And of course it matters depending on the question at hand, right? When you're talking about mobility, you have a quite different scale where you need to connect the neighborhoods, different cities, the periphery to the core. When we talk about the energy transition, then you have another dimension where the regional context is important, and the regional energy system plays an important role also for the urban energy system. So there are different scales looking into production, food production and the like, right? So these implications need to be considered. And in our program, I would say the urban-rural cooperation is an underlying issue that we need to get right. We don't have a priority that addresses this dimension especially, but it's an aspect that we need to consider in all our priorities. Again, depending on the scale and depending on the question at hand in different ways, but having these cooperation between the urban actors and regional actors, between research and policy making on all these sides, we need to make that happen. And we need to create in this partnership and this research and innovation partnership the appropriate ecosystem so that this partner can work together, right? And we might be able to touch upon that later. There are quite some hiccups and difficulties and barriers when we talk about science policy cooperation. But still, this is an environment that needs to advance and that needs to consider the requirements from the urban-rural dimension as well.
Thank you, Margit. Perhaps first one question also exposed this morning in the chat from the side of practitioners. Are you able also to create laboratories, experimental solutions by joining investment funding by the research level, or are we depending on different European initiatives in investment, DG Regio, DG Agriculture, DG Energy?
Yeah, this is really essential. So this creating these experimental zones, if you will, we call that urban living labs, is really an important an important instrument, a mechanism that allows all these actors to work together, right? So that we bring research into our cities, to all the people that are concerned, involving the citizens, the inhabitants, involving business and administration alike. So this experimentation is really key. And yeah, when it comes to the implementation, there are always legal and institutional barriers. In investing and creating those living labs is not always easy, but with this cooperation with the Commission, we try to create opportunities that we can support all these actors. right? There might be differences depending on the country or on the region, but the opportunity to get everyone engaged, I think this is something that we very strongly emphasize and try to ensure through our calls and additional activities.
Thank you very much. We go to Remy. Remy, could you make a...
Can you hear me now at all?
Yes, yes, the floor is yours.
Sorry.
You can start with the presentation.
Okay, let me see if you can see at all. Can you see?
Yes, fine.
Right. Okay, great. Thanks a lot, always. It's been a pleasure working with you for this to prepare and then now unleash all we have been thinking, working towards this particular area of work on the urban-rural linkage, the partnership, the cooperation, because even linkages calls for that idea of cooperation, of working, of collaborating. So the core is really so critical in the work of the urban-rural linkages. So today we're going to be talking very much on the core partnership, the partnership side, not necessarily co-production and other things, but that's what we want to talk about. And with the focus on policy, what that partnership means for policy and have been informed by science. So I will show you a few examples of how we have put together a partnership together to come up with, I would say, a science, a guidance that is informed by science and that had now been used in policy as we have been trying to use in other countries. So what you referred to earlier is the urban-rural linkages guiding principle, which I will just quickly just show you how that partnership was organized in terms of the time frame, how many stakeholders, the variety of organizations involved in this, and different instruments that the partners felt that they can use and adapt and adjust to their context to make that work. So yes, partnership is key for ensuring that we are all reading from the same script. And the guiding principle had been one of these examples of pulling together urban and rural actors together to think along the same line. As you heard earlier, within the context of territorial understanding and approach. So that's very central. And here, to make that work, we have to agree on what are the key principles that we guide the work both for urban and rural actors, partners, and that we have identified the 10 principles that are very important for all partners to work together, reading from the same script, as I said, but you have to go beyond that and say, what does it mean for me? Can I take action? So as partner working on this urban-rural linkages partnership, we have to always identify what is our role, what is our comparative advantage, what can I do if I'm working for local authorities, for academia, what does it mean for me? So that's what this partnership had been able to produce and go through different entry points, not only in terms of what I can do, but in which area. If I'm interested in health, in environment and other, what does it mean for me? And since we are not working in vacuum, we are working in the international multilateral collaboration, we have to make that partnership work even globally. That's why this example of the guiding principle that linked to the Sustainable Development Goals or the 2030 Development Agenda is very clear that it connects different parts. So that functional territory that we have been talking about is encapsulated through how you roll out the guiding principle. And to make that work, because sounds great, but how do I go about this? It's important that we have instruments as partners to see how we can engage with that. And you don't just develop tools in the living labs, but bringing that to the ground. And that's why we have example in some countries where we have been operating. I know that later we're going to be discussing how does it mean for the European agenda, for the Leipzig chapter, for partners in Europe. So we have to also have an advocacy to understand each other. And we create a forum of partners working on urban-rural linkages through the International Forum on Urban-Rural Linkages. are these areas of gathering of partners. So all these things are important for making Urban-Rural Linkages partnership work. And I know many of you have been part of the Urban-Rural Linkages webinars that brings together, again, different views, voices, and other. All these are important. But to make that work, we have to have training, we have to have some messages. Again, another instrument that we find useful to make Urban-Rural Linkages partnership work is to show examples. And this example we harness from different parts of the world, from Europe, Asia, Latin America, Africa, wherever we find inspiring practices. We are now developing the second compendium of case studies that is focusing, among other, on biodiversity, for instance, based on the interest. So a lot that partners can do. We are working with different partners, UNCCD, FAO, IFAD, you guys, on finding our entry. So finding our entry points are very important. And this can also go into the level of the topic. How can partnership on Urban-Rural Linkages work for those interested in food, for instance? So that also exists how in a territory, like the case here has shown. So cooperation is very important. You can't get Urban-Rural Linkages really what it's meant to be if partnership and cooperation are not really at the heart of this. Again, we have to keep having this a way in which we meet, discuss, like this particular assembly, to bring our minds together. So that type of events are there, and we are planning to continue this conversation in some of the events that we have lined up, where we hope as collaborator partners and interest parties on Urban Linkages will meet. So I will stop here and just look forward to discussing further and enhancing this partnership. Over to you, Uwe.
Thank you, Remy, for showing the global awareness on the rural-urban linkage topic and the dimensions of different agriculture, settlements, traffic, and so on. Before going on to the next speaker, we try to involve a little bit the public. My colleague Karl Eckert will show you the opportunity to make a vote on the MEA conference application. And we give you over the next 20 minutes the opportunity to answer to these questions, and will present the results in the beginning of the final discussion. Karl, what are the questions to the public?
Right, so thank you for that, Uwe. As you will see in the MEA app, as a participant in the conference, you can answer 4 questions related to this topic. I'll show you where to see that really quick. And what we would ask for you to do is to please navigate here in the MEA app. At the top, you will see this option for polls, and you can answer the 4 questions, and then we'll get back to it later in the presentation. Back to you, Uwe.
Thank you very much, Karl. We go to Kai. Kai, I'd also introduced you as one of the authors of the Territorial Agenda, which is a complementary document of the Leipzig Charta. Have there been many conflicts in the development of this Territorial Agenda, and what are the main key topics in the agenda concerning our topic, urban-rural partnerships?
Thank you and good afternoon. Yeah, as you said, I will say a few words about the Territorial Agenda, which actually has a much longer background than the Leipzig Charta. So we are looking at an intergovernmental cooperation in Europe that involves all the member states plus Norway, Switzerland, and some other neighboring countries, and which started well in the 1990s. So we have more than 20 years of building up different versions of the Territorial Agenda. And already in the first document that was approved by the ministers in 1999, rural-urban partnership and functional urban regions were one of the key principles and priorities. So from that side, the Territorial Agenda has worked with those things for a very long time. Looking at the new Territorial Agenda 2030, which will be adopted by the ministers on Tuesday next week, we have taken a little bit a different approach to it. So basically where we started is saying that we see increasing spatial inequalities and unsustainable developments in Europe. And that can be at very, very many different geographical scales. So we basically see that our territories and societies are drifting apart. People and places are more and more facing a fragmentation, and that concerns, among others, urban and rural areas. So we have that at an urban-rural level, but we have that also within larger areas in a country. We have that in Europe as a whole. And that fragmentation or that drifting apart of people and of places actually risks to undermine the basis of the success and the prosperity we built on in Europe for the last decades. So from that side, that is one of the key topics to be addressed, and really urban-rural partnerships are essential for that part. In addition, or parallel to that, we of course have climate change, and we have all the unsustainable developments we are seeing. And also those are addressed quite heavily by the Territorial Agenda, saying we need to make sure that we don't risk our future. So we need to get towards a more sustainable development that ensures that we have a future. And that is what then the Territorial Agenda tries to argue for or advocate, that we need to act together to have a future, and that Europe is not breaking apart and we're not risking our future. And based on that, the different countries involved have agreed on, there's a slogan for the Territorial Agenda, it's a future for all places, looking very much at the sustainable future for all places, which then is translated into the idea of a just Europe, where we really kind of work towards a just transition, but also a balance at European level, so that we have not too large disparity there, but also a balance at the level of functional regions. And that is where I see the rural-urban partnerships being quite strongly involved, in saying, there we have within the functional regions, we have rural areas, we have urban areas, and we really have kind of those rural-urban partnerships as an essential part to make that work and ensure that we have development and then of course also at a cross-border level. The second priority of the Territorial Agenda is the Green Europe, that looks really at the transition towards a sustainable and healthy Europe for all. And I guess also here, rural-urban partnerships are essential to make those things happening. And that is where we at the moment address a wide range of different aspects to go further with that. And then the issue is always...
your microphone is getting worse, perhaps in the last 2 or 3 minutes. We're coming a little, I don't know, perhaps move a little bit, but it's...
do you understand me better now?
No, it's now becoming more and more noisy in the background. Don't know what's the reason, but maybe...
I have no idea. Can see whether I can... But I can't change anything yet. So I can just try to speak a little bit more louder.
Yes.
No.
If we have an alternative, a nice little headset or...
No, unfortunately, I don't. And I can't change the settings either, so
In the meantime, Carl, do we have still answers to our questions?
So far, there are no answers to now, but we will get back to it soon.
Okay, because...
So if are you hearing me better now?
Very much better. Now it's okay.
Okay.
You
Okay.
end up with the green infrastructure, the greening Europe
Okay.
aspect.
Thanks. Well, it's really kind of about the green aspect of getting towards a sustainable and climate neutral Europe, so that we're moving in that direction. Also here, both urban and rural areas and the combination of urban and rural areas in partnership play an important role. What is then the aspect is kind of how do we actually achieve all those things? Being an intergovernmental cooperation document, it's actually not linked to any funding or regulations, but we're really needing the engagement and the commitment of a wide range of different players from the European over the national, transnational, cross-border, national, regional, and local level. And also there, from a lot of those things, it's not always a standardized players, but it's often more corporations. As we see that at the moment, we are building up pilot projects. For a lot of those pilot projects, it's more the functional area approach, where people come together from different parts that work on a similar issue and in a sort of multi-level governance or functional partnership cooperation do those things. Important for us is also that it's not one single policy sector. And I guess that's the same for all the rural-urban partnership aspects. We're not only talking about planning or transport or economy, but we're talking about getting quite a diverse set of policy sectors together, which are important to initiate such change that we need. And then what we try to advocate, and so far we get quite positive feedback, is also to say we don't want the work towards a just and a green Europe and those corporations in the functional areas and rural urban partnerships to become an additional extra task that is done by the different players. But it should be something that is part of your everyday, or of the players' everyday mandate, everyday work. So it's rather integrated into what you're doing than having an extra project that you run for 2 years and then you'll forget about. So it's more getting really the ideas into the ordinary work. And at the moment we are starting on Tuesday, we will launch 6 pilot cases that will showcase and test those approaches in very different dimensions. And there's also a first application of 52 ongoing projects which we have looked into to say, okay, actually those things are happening already. It's not asking, I have no, it seems to be more the internet connection that comes and goes than the microphone.
Luxembourg is isolated, okay.
Yes, fragmentation was the topic, wasn't it? So we are fragmenting out of the system here. No, but saying basically we are not asking for the impossible, but things that are already ongoing in the different parts of Europe. And I think all that you find as of Tuesday on the website of the Territorial Agenda, so territorialagenda.eu. And then I hope that Frederick, who sits in Luxembourg City, not in the countryside, has more luck with the internet connection.
Yes, thank you very much, Kai. We are changing not the country, but the level of intervention. Frederick, hello, welcome to our group. I introduced you as one of the key driver for the Sustainable Land Use and Nature-Based Solution Working Group of the Urban Agenda. Perhaps could you introduce a little bit the idea of the Urban Agenda and give us some key aspects to the aspect of land use and the idea to link it to urban-rural partnerships.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me well?
Very well. It's
perfect. Well, as Kai said, I'm sitting in the metropolis of Luxembourg, so here the internet connection is good. The Urban Agenda. Basically, the Urban Agenda is a multi-level governance initiative between the 28 member states, the partner states of Norway and Switzerland, together with the European Commission and some of the other European institutions. I should mention the European Investment Bank here, who's very active, and the cities in Europe, and really the cities regardless of size. So we're not only talking about big and large cities, but we're also talking about sort of smaller and medium-sized cities, which are actually the backbone of our urban continent. And the Urban Agenda as a framework unfolds along 3 different dimensions. They are called better regulation, better funding, and better knowledge. What does that mean? Better regulation is about making regulation better for cities so that it actually takes their interests and needs into account at the EU level from the very beginning of its inception and also when it's implemented. Better funding is about making the funding and financing instruments that are available at the EU level more suited for cities so that it's easier for them to access that. And better knowledge is actually about filling the knowledge gaps that still exist on some topics related to urban development at the EU level. And the main implementation mechanism that the Urban Agenda has is thematic partnerships. And one of those 14 at the moment thematic partnerships is called the Partnership on Sustainable Use of Land and Nature-Based Solutions. It was set up in 2017, and it has in total 20 partners. So this includes 9 cities from all over Europe, for example, Stavanger, Lille in France, Zagreb, Barcelona. There are 4 member states, there's the European Commission, and really a very diverse group of stakeholders that were coming together and were basically developing an action program with 9 different actions that they wanted to achieve. And as the name of the partnership already suggests, there's 2 different sides to this. The one is about promoting sort of a sustainable use of land that mitigates and reduces the impact of urban sprawl. And the second dimension was sort of mainstreaming nature-based solutions in the European policy-making context. Together, we had 9 meetings, and over the course of all those meetings, we developed 9 different actions. And one of them is very interesting because it is about really supporting and promoting the cooperation in functional urban areas in order to reduce urban sprawl. And here really is I think the intersection with the topic of urban-rural partnerships and linkages, because it was very clear from the beginning to us that in many cases, cities are cooperating on some topics, but one of the topics that is often missing from this functional cooperation is land use. I mean, it's a very personal decision for a city. When it's about a company that is trying to establish its headquarters there, it's about questions like taxes. But we realize that sometimes cities are not even aware that the decisions that they make in the field of transport, or as I said, in industrial policy, that this really can have a knock-on effect on other partners, be it smaller cities in the vicinity, be it suburban areas, or be it rural areas that are part of this functional area. So we really tried with this action to develop some concrete recommendations that we can give to cities and rural areas on how to effectively cooperate on the topic of the sustainable use of land to really reduce this problem that we have in Europe of the urban sprawl. So I think this is the most important contribution that our Urban Agenda partnership can make to this topic of urban-rural partnerships.
Thank you very much. Did you develop concrete proposals to reduce urban sprawl? The partner.
Yeah, sure. Very concrete, not in the sense that it's very difficult. I mean, we represent a lot of different institutional contexts, so we thought it was very difficult to develop one-size-fits-all solutions that can be really applied to every context. But in the recommendation document that our Polish partners who were the lead on this action, in the document that they have developed, they try as well as they can to go into specifics and really identify some of the mechanisms that cities can use depending on their context in the national planning system in order to cooperate with their rural partners. And there are a few case studies from countries like Poland, like France, on how this can be achieved. But obviously, it was not possible to find a solution for every single institutional context in Europe.
But you recognize that there's willing to cooperate and to reduce urban sprawl in partnership solutions.
I definitely think so. I mean, the cities that participate in these partnerships are not always sort of representative of the entire continuum of cities in Europe, but I think the feedback that we have received from them who were actively involved and from other cities who have sort of observed this, we have seen that there's a lot of interest in finding solutions and in tackling this issue. One concrete example is our Polish partners who were very active in this topic of functional cooperation in functional urban areas. They organized something in Poland where they tried to sort of spread the recommendations and the conclusions from this partnership to sort of all the cities in a national urban forum. And the feedback that we received is that there is really a lot of interest in these solutions. So yes, I think this can really make a difference.
Okay, I think also in Poland they use the opportunity to bundle European ERDF funding in partnership approach.
Yes.
So this is perhaps give some explanation to our practitioners in the group how this have worked in partnership approach. Okay, so perhaps getting back to the final discussion, Karl, did we have any response to the questions? And perhaps
So we do have the first results from the poll. I've also sent them to Johannes as well. Would you like to present them yourself? I would like to give the word to you if you would like.
Yeah, I can just briefly go over that. Thanks for that. Thanks for sending that over, although you're sitting at a very different place, a couple of 1,000 kilometers away. So we ask in the poll, let me just open the first question. On a scale from 1 to 10, how important are urban-rural partnerships for driving transitions? And so far, we have a rather high number. We had the participants an average of 8.3 for the importance. So that indicates that the participants, think this issue is very important in general. Coming back then to the more nuanced or more detailed question, we also ask what key word comes to your mind when you think about urban-rural partnerships connected to transitions. And I just pick out a couple here because I think they might be good then to take up in the discussion afterwards. There's communication, colliding ideologies, land-based solutions, inclusion, different levels of density, cooperation, but also understanding. I just throw that into the round for the panelists to react then upon that. We also asked, what are critical issues we need to get right to drive transitions? And the keywords are somehow reflected here. What is new, what was not reflected in the keywords was regional housing markets, which is a very interesting one. Then another question was, way forward, what are the next steps? What do you think are the next steps for all of us to drive the transitions, as a transition towards sustainability connected to urban-rural partnership? And there's one contribution in capital letters, which is action, which is a very interesting one. Maybe we can touch up on that in the discussion now. Then another one is increased cooperation, enhanced data collection and monitoring. And a very interesting one is also find a common language. I'm not entirely sure what it links to, but it is definitely something to discuss. I think with that, there's a little bit more in here, but I think I will leave it with that. I think it also shows, it hopefully gives some input for the discussion for the panelists as well. Thank you. Back to you, Karl or Uwe.
Yeah, thank you very much, Johannes. Remy, with the topic of common language, you have the experience with the document of urban-rural partnerships guiding principles. Could you agree that this would be an ideal basis for a common language on the terminology of urban-rural partnerships? Could the content, the different contents, the scales, the definitions, and so on?
Yeah, indeed, it's very important. As I was saying in my conversation earlier, it's all about reading from the same script. Are we meaning the same thing or not? I know that in different languages, it may differ, but substantially, we should be having as much as possible common language or common meaning when we attach to those things. I know some have been talking about, I don't know if this refer to are linkages the same as partnership or not. That might be maybe one of the underlying reasons why someone had asked that question. So I think that that's very important. And this is ultimately linkages. And I think now we agree that the territorial approach is critical. And that's for us a way of engaging on ensuring that actors and partners working in urban and rural have a common vision, find something of common that they can work towards. Instead of identifying differences, we focus very much on what are the things that bring, create more synergy, more complementarity, more common understanding. So yes, it's something that is desirable, but that should not stop us from what one of the contributors said: actions. Action will speak more than words, than intellectual exercise of defining what it is. So I would say it's desirable, but should not be the condition for us to act, to partner, to work together, to find common area of common interest and move together. Over to Uwe.
Thank you very much. Carl, we have a question in the chat. Wo?
Exactly. Thank you, Uwe. So I will present a question that was put into the chat by Mrs. Koshia, if I'm pronouncing that correct. It's a question directed at you, Frederick. And the question is, how are you connecting the sustainable use of land and the NBS partnership with the general efforts from the national to local level to achieve the SDGs? If you can please address this question, Frederick.
That is, of course, one of the $1 million questions. One of the key sort of principles of the urban agenda is that it's the urban agenda for the EU. So I think the primary level of analysis that we were looking at is action at the EU level. So be it regulation, be it funding, be it knowledge, most of the actions were really directed at the EU level. But obviously, because it's a multi-level governance initiative, we try to make it in sort of a bottom-up approach, that we were starting from the needs and interests of the cities, of the 9 cities that were partners in this partnership, and that we try to identify what they think is the main problem of why, for example, the use of land in their city is maybe not as sustainable as it could be, or how a more sustainable use of land could be promoted. From this, I mean, one of the problems of the urban agenda is that there was a little bit of a lack of commitment and let's say dedication from member states. So, I mean, we were only 4 member states. There's not much that we can do. There's not a sort of a complete European perspective that we can bring from 28 plus 2 different states. But we tried in our institutional context to see what we can do to accommodate these interests and these needs. And this links back to some of the things that Uwe has said, how we try to bring the recommendations and conclusions that we achieved back to our cities and our member states. So I know it's a bit of maybe an unsatisfying answer in the sense that it was not completely possible to create a super successful multi-level governance tool that really brings together all the levels in implementing the SDGs. But we tried our best to bring action up from the local level to the national, and from the national to the EU level. Thank you.
Perhaps I could also give the word to Kai, because as you mentioned, the territorial agenda is addressing this integrated approach and the spatial approach since 1999. So we have some experience about documents and the implementation of documents. And the question is, should we really trust in the idea that the documents will influence reality by the upcoming new funding period of ERDF, of agriculture policy? Or should we find new, perhaps pilot projects with more confrontal languages to implement the integrated agenda? Is it really so? Perhaps some ideas on this topic? I know you're the consultant, yes, and not the minister, so could a little bit.
If I would be the minister, it would be different. I think the important part is really to understand that European policies are only one part of one game in the town. So we can influence European policies, and I think if you go back to regional policies in the 90s and today, you see how much the territorial dimension gradually has been integrated. So I think there we can actually be quite happy and things are changing. But I argue strongly that we shouldn't put everything on EU policies. but we should think about what we can do at all the other levels as well. We can do a lot nationally, locally, regionally, which does not always need actually money. I think a lot of those things is also our mindset. And that links maybe also back to the question of the common language previously, because we have been fighting quite a lot with the issue of a common language, not in terms of terminology, but in terms of understanding and perception. So how people see that their concerns are taken on board or not. So at a European level, you have a huge discussion about places that don't matter, geography of discontent, which are basically places where the majority of the people feel that their concerns are not heard at regional, national, European level. And if you look into the geography of that, you see quite a lot of rural-urban divides actually in that. So I think we need to make sure that wherever you or one lives, there is the perception and the reality that the concerns of that area is taken on board, so that even if we might have a very EU type of language or nationally often a very urban type of language, we need to make sure that people not in the capital city, not in Brussels, understand that they are taken on board or that they have a chance to bring their concerns on board. And I think that is for me part of the biggest challenge, actually, the communication towards a common language where everybody feels I can participate and I can make my concerns heard. And there is a huge urban-rural divide across Europe in those things at the moment. So that would be one part which we all can work on, which European policies, ERDF can become better at, but I think also, yeah, in all national policies and regional strategies, we can actually improve that.
Thank you, Kai. This provokes a question to Margit. You're the coordinator of an initiative called Urban Europe. Do we need another initiative for rural Europe?
I don't know. I don't think so. But we are called Urban Europe, right? As we see the urban context as a very essential one to be able to achieve our sustainability goals in the first place. So understanding the city, the urban area, as a central hub for the entire region. Right? And we understand it in that sense, right? So when we're talking about urban, it's always the functional region on whatever level we're addressing that. And in that sense, I think we need to address it from a integrated perspective. We need to understand what the implications are in the administrative city context or in the wider regional context. And the urban-rural interface, so to say, I think is one entails a very, very important aspect, because what we are following in our partnership as kind of a guiding principle is identifying and addressing the dilemmas, as we call that, areas of conflict. Right? And we just touched upon that, right? You have quite obvious, looking into the urban-rural interaction, interface, cooperation, you have quite obvious different interests from the region and maybe from the city, from all the various stakeholders that engage along those lines. And what we want to do from our research program perspective is understanding these dilemmas, because if we don't address these dilemmas, we can't act neither in policy nor in any other way, right? We will always run into lock-ins. And in order to really make bigger progress, understand and overcome these barriers, we need to address these dilemmas. We need to make them visible, aware, and talk about them, address them, come up with new solutions, how we can work around that and co-design solutions with all these actors. So in that sense, I don't think we need a rural partnership as a counterpart, so to say, or even in a controversial sense. It's about understanding our urban areas, whatever size they have, whatever dense they might be, as the central hubs for transforming our society. And I think the region as such has a very essential role to play in that context, not only in the urban-rural cooperation and issues, but as a governance level, right? Because the region creates a wider context for the cities within they act. And in particular, in the morning, the smaller cities were mentioned. Right? And the smaller cities might have difficulties, might miss the capacities to engage in all these initiatives. But the region can create a framework that supports these smaller cities, that brings knowledge, evidence, good practice cases to these smaller cities, that helps them build capacities to engage within a wider region, a country, across the countries in Europe. So I think there is more than just this urban-rural dimension. The region has a very particular role to play that we now want to really take up in our partnership and ensure that we can reach out to also the smaller cities, to our towns within their national context, within their regional context, and have partners at hand that help us translate it, bring results into the regions as well.
Thank you very much. Giving the keyword of the future actions, Frederick, the current activity on this working group of sustainable land use is finished. Will there be a follow-up in the future, and what are the key ideas for continuing this started work on the sustainable land use?
Could you just repeat? I didn't get the first part of the question.
The question was, the working group have come to an end with the current funding period. And what are the ideas to continue the work, and what might be the focus? Perhaps also to the other members, because we discussed the Urban-Rural Partnership. We are not sure what is the focus of the partnership in functional urban areas. Is there enough scientific dimensions and definitions? Do we need include different topics, food, traffic, settlements? But first, Frederick, will there be a follow-up of the working group?
That's currently a topic under discussion. Apart from these 14 overarching themes that were identified, of which sustainable use of land is one, there were also a few cross-cutting issues, and exactly one of them is this urban-rural sort of continuum and the linkages. So at the moment, I think we are looking at whether between different partnerships there might be some actions that fall under these cross-cutting issues, like urban-rural partnerships. So I could imagine that if there is an interest from the cities, that there might actually be something more concrete on urban-rural partnerships. But as I said, this is as always, it unfortunately comes down to funding. So we have to see with the start of the new programming period whether this actually gets off the ground, or whether we will have to wait a little bit longer. But I think there is definitely interest in pursuing the work.
Could you add some words perhaps of the upcoming funding opportunities for the urban dimension, the urban innovative actions, URBACT, and different networks? If you have some inside views.
I do, but then I have to sort of change my hat from the Urban Agenda Partnership to the member states. Yes, exactly. So I think the European Commission has proposed in the ERDF regulation a very interesting tool that is the European Urban Initiative. This will be quite a big instrument that will have many different dimensions. On the one hand, there will be the innovative urban actions, so these will continue in this period, and there will be funding for very innovative ideas that sort of test new solutions. If you're interested in more details, I suggest that you have a look at the page of the European Commission. But URBACT will also continue in this period. So we are currently in the programming committee looking at what the new program of URBACT will look like. There will be, again, action planning networks, but we will also focus a little bit more on the transfer of good practices. So this is also how these two tools, the European Urban Initiative and URBACT, will be linked. And then obviously sort of the sustainable urban development will also be very strong in the national and regional programs of the ERDF. We are now talking about 8% that need to be invested in this sustainable urban development. So I think that, from the EU level, there is quite a lot of support in the next programming period to cities of all sizes.
And Kai, the territorial agenda will be also supported by SPON activities?
Yes, as there is a strong cooperation between the territorial agenda and SPON, and well, SPON as a program is still in the making for the next programming period, but as I understand from the involved players, they discuss various ways to support it, be it through targeted projects or thematics they dive into, or more practical aspects. So I think we can say SPON will be there to support the territorial agenda. How that looks like, we will see in the course of next year.
And Margaret, might it be a good idea perhaps also to come together with the Urban Innovative Action to create some pilots for JPI Urban Europe?
Absolutely, yeah. So we are in touch with the Urban Agenda partnerships for a while now. We have cooperation with some of them more regularly than maybe with others. So we are very open we are approaching them regularly to raise awareness, and so that the partnerships, the Urban Agenda partnerships, can take advantage of calls of activities that our network, JPI Urban Europe, and the upcoming European partnership are offering. And I think we are preparing next calls. So next year there will be, I think, some opportunities to engage for Urban Agenda partnerships or for any other actor as well in the mobility context, in the transformation, building transformation capacities context, maybe also on the positive energy district. So there is a couple of actions coming up spring next year. So watch out for that. Before we go into full force into implementing the partnership then in 22. And we will be happy. So we are part of the Urban Agenda process anyway as an observer. So we are part of this discussion, and we are very open to have an exchange, understanding the priorities and the needs voiced in the partnerships by the cities and by the other policymakers, translating that in our agenda and jointly taking action to deal with that.
Maybe you might be a little bit afraid of our bureaucratic speech because we are looking from SPON, JPIs, and so on, and it's not common language, I would say, for everyone. From your outside view to Europe, should be Europe a front runner in presenting innovative ideas and projects, and how could we link this to the worldwide discussion and networks of UN Habitat?
Well, this is interesting. We have this default, maybe appreciation. People may think that UN Habitat, since we are based in Africa, we are in the global south, but we cover Europe as well. It's just that in some of the programs, we have not really made headways very much in Europe, but in Eastern Europe, we have very active program in various areas, just to say that. But globally, yes, it's very important in our idea of a partnership and cross-learning, cross-fertilization, cooperation is key. So you already indicated earlier what are the opportunities to cooperate, and we be more than happy to join hands in some of these calls that are coming in to take this partnership forward. I think we discussed this in the preparation. So we are looking for ideas here to action, to take commitments, to move forward. So we are very much behind this. One of our unique selling points is be able to bring different partners to convene all these partners together. So be willing to bring all this as part of the cooperation. So beside that, we would like to see what I just talk about funding, platform to meet together. The third one is to develop some of this normative work. Here, I think some of these areas, like the 14 priority area issues that have been identified, we'd like to also collaborate on issues, including the instruments, the tools, to reduce, as we heard earlier, the issue of divide, regional or territorial divide or decline in some parts of the world. So just to say that we are very much open to partner in any forms and others, but these 4 areas would be, for me, the low-hanging fruits on joint fundraising, putting things together where we can serve the 195 member states, so we can have a bigger outreach. We have a platform where we can all meet, discuss, find ways, put minds together, and then look at a specific issue of interest. Could be migration, could be health, or COVID now, or whatever you want to focus on. And the last one are providing instruments, how to do this. And we have to do that together. We believe very much in cooperation. So this would be, for me, 4 areas of work that are easily, not easily, but we could start looking into and see if there are partners, parties out there interested in it. So globally, we'll be very much willing to bring all the European rich experience in this area to other parts of the world, and vice versa. We see a lot happening, say, in China from our engagement. Why can we bring that to some parties or some actors who are interested in learning? Since we already have a footprint in such areas. So a lot there to really multiply our efforts, scale that up, making sure that we don't invent the wheel, we try to learn and move forward. So from the global perspective, it's really what we are supposed to do. So we are here to, join this wave for that global partnership on urban-rural linkages. Over to you.
And we have the event in Katowice in 22 or
yes.
23?
2022. So on that one, what I was, it goes into our, what I mentioned, our convening power. We mentioned just three events there. We have the International Forum of Urban-Rural Linkages that is coming up next year in November in China. Then we have Katowice in Poland in 2022, and many other events out there that we could, anyone interested, reach out to us, and we're going to bring these events or opportunities for discussing and jointly present events, jointly present, our coalition of the willing to advance this program together. So our wish is from UN Habitat is that this should not be just one conversation. This should be the seed for a stronger partnership on urban-rural linkages.
Thank you very much, Remy. Carl, do we have some questions, remarks from the audio?
Correct. There are no more questions from the chat. There was the comment from a further colleague from the UN stating a further link of information on the Urban-Rural Partnerships documentation, so please feel free to check that out. Otherwise, if you'll allow me, Uwe, I will shortly share my screen. And you should also put your mic on mute, Uwe, please, just to stop any feedbacks. And what I'll do right now is just show really quick what answers we got through the voting poll online. And colleague Johannes Riegler already presented some of the main topics already, but as you can see, this little word cloud shows what the participants understand under a keyword for urban-rural partnerships. Communication was put in more than once, so it's a little bit longer than the others. But as you see, it's a very wide variety of answers. I'm sure if we looked into this a little bit more, we can find common areas for many of these terms and actually put them together. Here's a quick overview of what the participants have wrote to the third question: what are critical issues to drive towards transitions towards sustainable urban-rural regions? Again, many different aspects, regional housing markets we talked about before, but also dialogue, integrated planning, and transparency are some of the issues that I would highlight myself right now with this overview. And finally, on the last question, this is the overview of the answers that we received. What are the next steps for driving transitions through science policy cooperation? Again, setting up these participation processes is mentioned, one of them making case studies. So, for example, the presentation given by Remy at the beginning of this session is a very good example of case studies for this topic, and the participants, at least in this answer, seem to agree with that as well. With that, I'll give the mic back to you, Uwe.
Thank you very much, Carl. given the final input to our discussion, I propose to come to the final round of remarks. From my perspective, we could recognize, giving the title of our session, Driving Transition, that a lot of our initiatives are just in transition. So JPI Urban Europe is just starting the initiative and focusing for the next activities in the next year. The urban agenda is also in transition because the first results are quite positive. The indication shows towards the needs and the opportunities for urban-rural partnerships, and we could expect also perhaps initiatives in network form in this activity. And the Territorial and Leipzig Charter will be adopted. We are still not aware formally of the text, but informally, yes. But so a lot of different initiatives are in transition in the starting point and will be implemented in the next 6 or next 12 months in the European level. And at the international level, from Remy, we have heard the importance of the topic at the international level from China, Africa, South America. Maybe at the European level, we are a little bit in a very comfortable way, because as I follow a little bit the discussion in the Global South, the need of ensuring food for cities and for organizing urban-rural partnership to really to ensure basic needs of food insurance and agricultural level and agricultural land is much more important and present. And it's also perhaps one topic which is yet not so prominently addressed at the European level. Anywhere, the Stadtland Plus network promised to you at the European, at the international level, to be presenting and developing innovative ideas and a lot of proposals for the different levels of urban-rural partnership to get in the discussion of governance models and to bring this into the different networks and stakeholder initiatives in the next few years. And we hope that we could continue in this forum, perhaps the discussion on the topics in the next 2 or 3 years, by accompanying this interesting period in front of us by the implementation of the European funding and the international initiatives. And I didn't mention the COVID aspect because it's clear that also our topic will be somehow influenced and changed in this dimension in the next year. Some final remarks from the podium. Frederick, thank you very much.
Johannes. Thank you. Sorry, I just quickly wanted to get back to what was just presented. The sort of the 3 terms that stuck in my mind were the communication, the governance, and the networking. And I think this really sort of is the holy trinity of what we need in urban-rural partnerships. I mean, yes, communication, you really need to understand and listen to the other party. What are their needs? What are their interests? Why? So create really a win-win situation for both to cooperate, because I think that's not a given in every situation. I think the networking aspect, I understand that also in relation to political willingness. Someone screamed action, and I think that's what's really about. Talking and understanding is good, but you need to follow it up with concrete actions. And I think lastly, governance is very important. This is one of the topics that we focused on in the urban agenda quite a lot, because all of these interactions can be structured in very different ways. Some of them are more sustainable, some of them are less sustainable. So it's really about finding, first of all, a win-win situation and being able to sustain this in the long run, and in really creating understanding for the needs of both sides and trying to cater to those needs. So I think that, therefore, this is really communication, governance, and networking are really the 3 most important concepts in this regard, at least for me and from the perspective of the urban agenda.
Yeah, Kai?
I agree fully with Frederick. I was having one additional thought. We are, at least in Europe, often very comfortable in our European bubble. And from that perspective, I'm very happy that Remy is with us today, because I believe also we in Europe can learn a lot by looking to other parts of the world. And sometimes it's really more the nitty-gritty details of how something is solved. It's not the entire package or something, but I think we should also, when it comes to rural urban partnership, territorial agenda, urban agenda, Leipzig Charter, and all those things, we should dare looking beyond Europe and see whether we can learn things also from all the other parts of the world. So I think from that part, I think we have a good start here today by broadening and opening the European bubble. We should do more of that.
Thank you very much, Kai. Margit?
Yeah, I would like to, so I agree with Frederik's comment. I would like to add one dimension which we heard a lot over the last month when we had consultations discussed with city representatives, administration, and how can we ensure that we take bigger steps towards sustainability? How do we get it going? And one issue that came also up on the list is defining the goal, and it's about political will, right? At the end of the day, we need to get our politicians to make decisions in a new way, right? And this is not only, and this is tricky, right? So what we see is that we need to not only create the good stories and examples that they hopefully hook on, but that it's about a new indicators and narratives that let people understand, society as well as politicians alike, right? That it's worthwhile taking the effort to transform our cities. That it's not just the green image or about greening the city per se, but rather that there is an economic dimension to that. There is a new boost that you can create with all these developments. And for that, you need indicators that kind of compete with traditional indicators for real estate investments, right? And for making it attractive for all these investors and actors to take decisions in a different way, to invest in sustainable options. And I think this is something that we all together need to find a way to deal with that. I think they are not there, not in a way that they can compete with traditional narratives and indicators and how we monitor progress. So we need to really redesign that and provide our politicians, authorities, decision makers, but also society, new opportunities, new narratives, so that they are able to buy in and that they can follow.
Thank you very much, Margit. I think your initiatives are not mainstream initiatives because you're in your different departments always a little bit like a small corner of innovation in this urban and rural dimension. And but I think it's very clear from your intentions that we are not Sunday speech initiatives. So we are really addressing topics that we are gathering funding for pilots, and we are willing to push forward the topics in the next year. And I'm quite hopefully that in this context, it will be possible to present good examples and perhaps in some idea to cultivate the competition, because I'm not a fan of the idea to come over competition just by negotiation and Sunday agreements. But Karl, you have questions from the podium?
Exactly, yes. I would like to present one more question to Kai Böhme, coming from the chat of the application. 1 second. And they're asking, does the new version of the Territorial Agenda 2030 state specific targets which should be achieved to fulfill the aims of the 2015 Paris Agreement /IPCC? The word is yours, Mr. Böhme.
Thank you. Good question. And I wish I could say yes, but unfortunately the Territorial Agenda is very soft in its edges and doesn't state specific target indicators or set targets. So it's more the overarching part.
And Kai, you mentioned yesterday it will be only adopted and not signed?
Nowadays, the ministerial meetings are not physical, so we can't send documents around. So there will be a virtual informal ministerial meeting where the ministers adopt the agenda, but that will not have a physical expression in terms of a signed piece of paper, but has the same status.
Okay. So, thank you very much. If there is no chat and other remarks, we come to the end of our session. Oh, still, Carl?
Yep, we have one more question from the chat. So I'll just throw it into the room and we'll see who would decide to try to answer it. The question is, what are specific approaches, such as knowledge spreading or funding support as examples? Which specific approaches would you strengthen to integrate specifically regions which are lacking behind in sustainable urban transformations, either because they're missing bridging actors or because of the economic situation that they find themselves in?
Questions to all members. Who will start? Remy? 2 words?
Yeah, sure. I think this is a very important. Where do we start? What are the leads? What are the low-hanging fruits? One of the initiatives, just again, as we are trying to look for partnership, we are interested in is to get the evidence. What was mentioned earlier in terms of indicator, we are developing data evidence, really quantified evidence for partnership or linkages. I think without that, it will always be difficult to know where the regions that are lagging behind are and others. So consolidating this is an area that UN Habitat is looking towards. Yes, I think the person also asked the issue of funding, which I felt was important. How do we actually, I would not say really funding for everyone, but equitable. How do we inject equity in on our actions? Because what we found in many of the funding proposal, they should be focusing on urban or rural. Is there any mechanism in the funding mechanism or grants mechanism you have globally in the European Union, for instance, that will foster, that will ensure that there is that territorial dimension that is considered as an indicator or criteria for selection of projects? This is not, it's still very sectoral in a way. So that's a battle we need to work towards so that we promote this type of areas for more inclusive development, for more territorial approach in our work. And we have the opportunity now through RCTs, for instance, to do something a bit different, innovative, because we have been discussing with some partners in Europe. They said their bigger challenge was that they were the area was actually disconnected, not having enough sufficient internet capacity, and they were more affected in this context of COVID, where they have to work from home. So this type of situations, we think that I heard a lot that we are in a comfort zone in Europe, but there are still areas that need some particular attention when it comes to areas that may be lagging behind. How do we create more equitable society? So to link back to the theme of this session, which is science and policy, evidence for me is important. Data is important to inform policies so that we target exactly where the needs are, instead of just having a blanket policy that may not be addressing really the needs or the root causes. So that would be an area I feel we need to focus on. For those still interested in case studies, I think that has been for us in terms of policy making, informing policy, informing changes, having case studies. That's why we have continued documenting case studies on how partnership in the urban-rural linkages works or doesn't or do not work. So we have this type of things, and we're going to be releasing another one in about a week. Anyone interested in this, we can develop more cases to learn from. I think there's no better thing than from other peers and partners as a way of engaging with partners on urban-rural linkages. Over to you, Uwe.
Thank you, Remy. Those who are interested in the topic of data, SDGs, and reference frameworks are invited tomorrow morning to the CEMR, the Association of European Cities and Regions, together with the European Joint Research Centers, to discuss the indicator issue in the Friday morning session. Margit, is a science community present and able to join and to support this week and peripheral regions?
Absolutely, it's a very good aspect, and I agree. The funding is needed in a way to provide resources that these communities, these experts, the people can engage. However, our experience is that the funding is by far not enough. So what needs to come first actually is to build the networks, to mobilize the people, to let them in the European research community. This is about transnational cooperation in many cases, right? So we need to bring those people, the experts, the researchers, the cities, connect them to other regions so that they can learn, that they have a basis where they can then apply for research project, that they can apply for the money, and that they have a higher success rate. So without building the capacities in those regions, in those countries, they won't get far. They might get a bit of a funding, but they will continue along their lines. Right? And in order to make bigger steps, to close the gap that we see also in Europe, that's something where we need to build bridges, right? Where we need to mobilize the communities, connect them from more front runners and maybe those that are lagging behind in whatever kind of way. We need to connect them so that they build capacities together and benefit from other experiences. And without that, the funding will fall short.
Okay.
I agree, and also in particular the part on capacity building in the regions and in the cities or in the rural communities. That is very important. What I believe what is also very important is that we reach out beyond the usual suspects. In all our parts, we have the usual players that are very much involved and try to convince them. I think we need to broaden that to become really successful and also achieve more funding. For the Territorial Agenda, we are very happy that by now we have managed to get the European Investment Bank as a strong player on board. Not usually one of the players you expect in a Territorial Agenda document, but over the years they have seen that there's a benefit for their approach to bankable supporting projects in the more territorial dimension, and they're getting more and more engaged. And I guess we need to really also take those parts where we go out and talk to other people than just the usual crowd. And then also in the areas, and that links back to the capacity building, support good governance. We can do a lot of investments, we can do a lot of things. If there is not a good, high quality governance in the area, we will not get the long-term positive effects out of it. So that also needs to be supported.
Thank you very much, Kai. I think it's clear that the investment, safety of investment is highly dependent on this quality of governance. Nevertheless, the experience of the European Commission with integrated elements like the community-led developments haven't been so, let's say, a tiger in the European funding streams, or?
Yes, I think the LEADER and CLLD investments, I think they're small bits and pieces. They break ground here and there. But I think also that when you look at the impact assessments, that they show how important it is and how much you can trigger with comparably small amounts of money. So from that side, I think they are good examples, but it's not about upscaling them, but it's about realizing what they show, that local governance, regional governance play a role. And that we need to also think about that when we do the big investments, when we do the big changes. It's not that we kind of should only do CLLDs, but that we learn about the importance of governance from that.
Yeah, Frederick, I always wanted you to ask, I think also in the state of Luxembourg, you're cooperating quite intensively with the EIB in terms of green infrastructure projects and cooperation projects. Is this component of consultancy of subsidies and a component of credits? Is this one of the promising future drivers for urban-rural cooperation?
I'm getting always the difficult questions, I have the feeling. Yes, I think it is. I think the European Investment Bank is quite active in sort of trying to understand the territorial approach, and they're also very active in their urban development sector. So I think yes, definitely. The European Investment Bank is an actor that in the next few years will become very important in the European, but also in the sort of going beyond the European context, because they have a lot of projects in other parts of the world. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I also wanted to say that I think URBACT has an important role to play in Europe. URBACT, one of its main goals is the capacity building. So I think in the next programming period, there will be a strong focus on this as well. And I think the new political objective 5 is also going to help a lot in strengthening the functional approach in Europe. So I think this is also something where we should look out for the first results in, let's say, 2 or 3 years on how this is working out.
Could you give perhaps 2 words on Objective 5 to get a little bit beyond this bureaucratic language?
Great.
For our practitioners who are attending, because this is of relevance for nearly all European politicians and communities and cities and regions, because this Objective 5s, depending on the local implementation in the regions here in Saxony, for example, will drive a little bit very strongly the possible investments in the next 7 years.
So whereas sort of the political objectives 1 to 4 are very sectoral and thematic, political objective number 5 is really in supporting territories in sort of in their development. So it's really encouraged to do sort of to develop strategies for functional areas. This can be, I think, sort of more in a very specific urban, suburban. This can be urban-rural partnerships. I know from experience here in my ministry that we're also working on Interreg and how this can be implemented across borders. So I really think this political objective 5 on territorial strategies is going to be really important to bring Europe closer to its citizens and really make it relevant beyond just sort of simple infrastructure investments as you have in many cases for the other political objectives.
And from this integrated approach, it's also a message to our research communities as an opportunity to implement practical results from research into practice and in pilot projects and mainstream funding. Okay, so Carl, last question to the chat. I think the coffee is now approaching.
No question.
So finally, I restarted my final thanks. Thank you very much to joining this session. I think the idea of the session was to really bundle initiatives at the worldwide and European level, and a little bit focus in the European level. We see the dimension of the initiatives in the scientific community, in the policy community with the urban agenda, and we are hopefully looking forward some new inputs and initiatives from Leipzig Charter and Territorial Agenda. And we are committed from our side, from the URP conference, from the Stadtland Plus network, to internationalize and to network in the idea to use all your initiatives very intensively in the next months and years. And so in this way, we hope we stay in contact and we have a fruitful bilateral, trilateral, multidimensional exchange, and hopefully perhaps we could see, for example, Remy in Katowice in 2 years and make a next balance of the first results of the ideas and initiatives. Thank you very much for joining the conference, and those who are interested in metropolitan governance could join after the coffee break the METREX session, and those who have been interested in SDGs tomorrow morning, CEMR, and JRC networks at the European level SDG discussions. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.